By 2008, the Tomb Raider series had a clearly defined and very successful style. Third-person, single-player, exploration-based, and filled to the brim with puzzles. It was a formula that resonated across several entries, and after the completion of a lucrative reboot trilogy, the team at Crystal Dynamics was looking to the future. While they began work on their next major title, they still had another idea. What if they changed everything they knew worked and took a leap of faith? With the visual design by graphic artist Toby Gard and a distinctive name put together by lead programmer Paul Douglas and scriptwriter Vicki Arnold, Lara Croft made an instant impression upon her debut in 1996's Tomb Raider. 3D gaming was still in its infancy. Tomb Raider's brand of grid-based platforming and exploration was unlike anything else on the market. The game was a hit, selling over 7 million copies and leaving Lara Croft as one of the most recognizable characters in the industry. Gamers asked for more, and the team at Core Design were happy to oblige, offering up a sequel in 1997, and another in 98, and 99. Also 2000. The developers had long since been burnt out by the yearly releases, but publisher Eidos kept pushing for more to consistently diminishing returns. After running this gauntlet of development, Core Design would end up making only one more sequel, 2003's infamously rushed and underbaked Angel of Darkness. While the sixth game in the series sold well, it faced terrible reviews and a cold reception from fans. Eidos, despite being the biggest reason behind the steep decline in quality of the franchise, decided there was still blood to be squeezed from that rock and opted to bring another development team in to take over. Responsibility for Tomb Raider was handed to Crystal Dynamics, a developer that first cut its teeth on a handful of games for the ill-fated 3DO before finding success on the original PlayStation with their platforming series Gex, action game Akuji the Heartless, and most notably, Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver. Once they were given the reins of Lara Croft's continuing adventures, they wouldn't release any games outside of the franchise for the next 14 years. Their journey with the globe-trotting heroine would begin with Tomb Raider Legend, released in 2006 as the first entry in a trilogy meant to reboot the franchise. It featured more modern controls and gameplay akin to the popular Prince of Persia: Sands of Time from 2003. Sands of Time was a massive hit in the early aughts and popularized a type of parkour-inspired platforming that several other developers would also end up adopting. Legend would use it to great effect, adapting the earlier Tomb Raider entry's environmental puzzles into something more digestible for contemporary audiences. It would utilize the same engine to create a remake of the first title in the franchise with 2007's Tomb Raider Anniversary, before wrapping things up with 2009's Underworld, the final entry in the trilogy. The reboot series wouldn't reach the same sales success as the originals, but the games all moved a respectable amount of units and received a generally positive critical reception. Afterwards, Crystal Dynamics began to explore ideas on how to move the series forward and landed on yet another reboot that would take the form of what would later be referred to as the Survivor Trilogy. Development of the first title in this series would take several years, and in the meantime, another opportunity to keep the franchise alive had presented itself. Xbox Live Arcade. When the Xbox 360 launched in 2005, it came with the first widely adopted digital marketplace on consoles, allowing games to be purchased entirely online. Due to several factors, however, those perusing the store wouldn't see any of the then current retail releases on the service. At the time, high-speed internet was not widely available in the United States, so the service would feature more bite-sized content to accommodate the slower download speeds offered by early broadband connections. Because expansive hard drives were also not widespread and the system still offered consumers the option to utilize small capacity memory cards, games were initially limited to a mere 50 megabytes in size to ensure players wouldn't end up purchasing a game they didn't even have room for. Due to the limitations developers had to face in those early days, what was released ended up being a mix of classic games and smaller experiences that offered either a faster pace or shorter playtime. The concept took off, and as internet speeds and hard drive adoption increased, so too did the size and complexity of the titles on offer. Games were eventually capped at 2 gigabytes, allowing for much more grandiose ideas to be fleshed out. Even with these changes, the goal of offering smaller and more affordable experiences for players remained the same. It was a hit with consumers and developers alike. Creators had more freedom to experiment than they could with their larger tentpole releases, and gamers were given a steady stream of content at a price point perfect for impulse purchases. Quirky releases that never would have made it out of a concept phase could be fully realized, and long-dormant franchises returned without requiring massive teams and budgets. For Crystal Dynamics, the marketplace provided an opportunity to take an already prolific and familiar character and imagine them in an unfamiliar way. In an interview with Christopher Grant for tech news outlet Engadget, brand director Karl Stewart discussed the shift the company was making at the time. Underworld had shipped, the DLC for 360 had already shipped, and we just realized that when we started looking at our next game, we knew that we needed to take a step back and build the next big title, and it wasn't going to come year after year. That's been one of our frustrations, seeing the titles come out year after year after year, so we decided that was the end of that. After coming dangerously close to the same rushed release schedule that almost killed the series and left it stagnating, Crystal Dynamics adopted a different plan for their upcoming title. Work on the next Tomb Raider reboot had begun, with a longer development cycle planned to give the company more room to explore concepts and build a bigger game. To keep the franchise fresh in people's minds, part of that process would also include spinning off a smaller team to delve into a more unique project with a faster turnaround for an arcade release. They took the same engine used for Underworld and began to throw around ideas to see if they could take things in a new direction. What they would eventually land on bore little resemblance to the Tomb Raider franchise. Action-heavy, isometric, and multiplayer focused. Players would still find themselves traversing ancient ruins and exotic locales, but they'd be doing it while blasting shotguns and grenade launchers with a friend alongside them. Because of the heavy deviation from the series' formula, the decision was made to develop this as its own entity under the Lara Croft name. The game was built from the ground up with 2 players in mind. On the lead up to release, designer Daniel Newberger would discuss with the media network Game Reactor the approach the team took when designing cooperative play. One of our big focuses was to have it be a real true co-op experience, so it's not just 2 people playing the same game at the same time. It's 2 people that have to work together and use their special abilities in order to solve problems. You really can't beat this game unless you have trust in your partner and you and your partner develop a rapport. Each playable character has distinctive abilities and equipment that allows for dynamic traversal and problem solving, but only if a partner is set on helping out. Those without someone to play alongside wouldn't be excluded, however. While the game was designed around multiplayer, a single-player mode would feature a different approach to both the story and levels, with redesigned puzzles to accommodate lone gamers. Cutscenes were also modified, and rather than implementing an AI-controlled partner, Lara Croft would instead be given access to weapons and tools to make it through areas on her own. When discussing the design philosophy Eidos and Crystal Dynamics held behind development, Karl Stewart cited titles both old and new as influences in an interview with Ray Carcillo. We took a step back and realized that we have 15 years of history doing puzzle games and exploration, and then, taking inspiration from Baldur's Gate and Gauntlet, looking at our world when we tried the isometric view, we saw something special there. And then, obviously, looking at the games that have come out over the last year or two, Trials HD and Shadow Complex, games that have really raised the bar, it gave us an opportunity to say now we can come into this space, try something new, and deliver something. After roughly a year of development, Guardian of Light would eventually release on Xbox Live Arcade in August of 2010. Microsoft required any developer to partner with a publisher to release a title on the service, creating a barrier for entry that would exclude most small or independent studios. Crystal Dynamics easily met that criteria, however, with Eidos and Crystal Dynamics having been purchased by publisher Square Enix in April of 2009. Square Enix backed the title while enjoying an easier path to marketing because of the lack of competition on the digital marketplace. Only 1 or 2 games would release each week, with Microsoft dropping them like clockwork every Wednesday. Each year, Microsoft would additionally put a spotlight on a handful of games and set their release between July and August when the Summer of Arcade event took place. Spots were a boon for developers and publishers due to the increased promotion Microsoft provided for the titles, building anticipation in the weeks up to release and often putting them front and center on the digital storefront. The benefits went both ways. Publishers got to spend less on advertising their games, and Microsoft was able to gain legitimacy with genuine blockbusters coming out on their platform. One of the games cited by Stewart, Shadow Complex, had been part of Summer of Arcade in 2008, and it drastically changed how consumers viewed the digital marketplace. At the time, it was the most successful game on Xbox Live Arcade, featuring quality and production values unheard of for a downloadable title. Shadow Complex was a search action game similar to the likes of Metroid and Castlevania Symphony of the Night, a style that hadn't gotten much attention on the Xbox platform. Developed by Chair and published by Microsoft themselves, the title soundly proved with its record-breaking sales that there was an appetite for broader and more varied genres. By the time Guardian of Light released a year later, the cooperative twin-stick shooter starring arguably the most recognizable woman in gaming was a natural fit. Despite initial apprehension due to the shift in style, Lara Croft launched to a positive reception and would sell nearly 100,000 copies in the first week. The quick pick-up-and-play nature of the title resonated with gamers, while the roughly 6-hour length, optional challenges, and variations in story offered a fair amount of replay value for those diving into the isometric adventure. The game later would release on the PlayStation 3 and PC digital platforms, where it achieved similar success. After development of the main title finished, the team began work on additional content that would later go on sale for anyone looking to extend their time with Guardian of Light. 3 sets of challenge maps were released, offering small doses of isolated puzzle and combat areas, but 2 character packs were also put out that gave players more reasons to run through the campaign again. Gameplay remained the same, but the story was completely altered in order to accommodate the new characters. The first pack centered around Kane and Lynch from the eponymous set of games created by IO Interactive. IO Interactive, best known for their Hitman franchise, were also owned by Eidos and were included in the sale to Square Enix. The setting and tone of their own series in no way matched the fantastical elements of the Tomb Raider franchise, but the fish-out-of-water aspect of their inclusion is played to great effect and leads to several humorous moments that make for a worthwhile playthrough. The second pack hit closer to home for those at Crystal Dynamics. Long before taking the reins on Tomb Raider, the company had developed nearly every title in the Legacy of Kain series. Soul Reaver, the second entry in the franchise but the first fully built by Crystal Dynamics, was considered groundbreaking and highly acclaimed when released in 1999. The final bit of downloadable content for Guardian of Light allowed the company to create a story with characters they hadn't touched in over 7 years, a meaningful way to wrap up their work. Following the conclusion of development for the arcade game, the team went back to help out on the next big entry in the Survivor trilogy, while the sub-series they created would lie dormant for several years. Work would continue on what would become Rise of the Tomb Raider, but fan demand led to a small team once again being put together to create a sequel to Guardian of Light. After roughly 18 months, Lara Croft and the Temple of Osiris would release in late 2014. There were a few additions, with the player count now boosted up to 4 and a more robust loot system being put in place, but it maintained the same cooperative puzzle-solving and action-packed focus. The game may have been similar, but the landscape it was released in was not. When the Xbox One launched in 2013, Microsoft quietly retired the Xbox Live Arcade branding. Digital marketplaces had since become ubiquitous, and the lines were heavily blurred between retail and digital releases. Almost every game, big or small, would release day and date in stores and online. Temple of Osiris wasn't part of a summer promotion or the only game released that week. It was just another game added to the marketplace on a random Tuesday. There was also a seemingly industry-wide shift towards almost exclusively large-scale titles. Budgets and production timelines exploded, and the days of shorter projects that took a year or 2 to put together were seemingly over, at least for most high-profile publishers and developers. More experimental or niche games wouldn't stop being made, but they were mostly left up to independent developers. While Crystal Dynamics certainly didn't start the trend, at the behest of their publisher, they did have to follow it. After Temple of Osiris, they would focus entirely on ventures that took anywhere from 3 to 5 or more years to complete. Fortunately, their earlier works like Guardian of Light wouldn't disappear nor stay relegated to the past. Its PC and Xbox versions remain available to this day, and the game would even find its way to consoles like the Nintendo Switch almost 13 years after its initial release. Younger generations can boot it up without any context and enjoy its quick burst gameplay just as much as those that downloaded it for the first time in 2010. It may be part of a prolific franchise, but it's a title that eschewed almost everything in order to try something new. Crystal Dynamics took the tools and assets they already had, gave them to a handful of people, and told them to simply make something fun. Based on its reception, Guardian of Light more than accomplished that. For brand new fans or those with fond memories of it from that particular summer of arcade, It's also a good reminder of a time when creators were willing to take a step back from their own work and try to approach it with a different perspective.
An impressive specimen. You will serve me well.
Shut the f*** up!